Friendly Film Crit podcast. I'm your host, Ben Filipkowski, resident film freak.
And I am Farrah Sarpkaya, a person who loves film, but like in a super chill, have I mentioned I love miniatures and practical effects sort of way?
And with a purposeful grimace and a terrible sound, we are not pulling the spitting high-tension wires down. No, today we are talking, of course, about the 1954 classic monster movie, Godzilla, directed by Ishiro Honda and starring Akira Takarada, Momoko Kochi, Akihiko Hirata, Takashi Shimura, and Haruo Nakajima in the titular monster suit. Godzilla remains a remarkably profound metaphor for the destructive power of nuclear war, but it also remains an incredibly iconic and influential monster movie. Set in 1954, as ships begin to vanish or are sunk around Japan's Odo Island, paleontologist Kyohei Yamane is sent to investigate tales of a humongous creature terrorizing the island's inhabitants. Turns out, it's true. The ancient creature Godzilla, disturbed from his peace by H-bomb testing, is now on the rampage. As the Japanese self-defense forces mount an increasingly desperate series of defenses against the 160-foot-tall monster, Yamane works with his pupil Daisuke Serizawa to study the creature and find a solution before it's too late. So Farrah, what'd you think of this one?
Absolute classic. Amazing miniature and prop work. 10 out of 10. No notes. But seriously, I mean, it's a classic monster movie, right? It's like, we'll talk a bit about this later, but like it really does dive into, or it is a touchstone of the genre. And are there questionable plot beats that make me question the plot? Yes. Do I care? Not even a little bit. The thing that most intrigues me about monster movies and horror in general, and I'll quote a trailer here from the Shudder horror documentary on women in horror I saw recently, that horror is a critique of society, but you do it with zombies. And as Japan grappled with like the responsibility of humanity around the creation of like, highly destructive weaponry, it is truly a work of art that I think, as much it is a quintessential monster movie, it's also a really deep look at that sort of thing. And I'm excited to talk about it. I guess in this case, though, the line would be closer to a critique of society, but you do it with a person in a lizard suit and some miniatures. But I love that. I love it. And it was it was a really fun watch after I finally found a way to watch it with subtitles because it was a whole thing. Ben got many a text where I was like, what is happening? But no, I think speaking of all of that, and we are film as a vehicle for metaphor. And like I said, this is a really profound one because for those of you that don't know your history, during the Second World War, the United States leveraged atomic bombs in Japan, causing a truly, I'm going to use the word incredible as a negative here, amount of destruction, damage, loss of human life, and long-term impact. And so when we watch this film, which was made in 1954, so a little while after that, but not as long as it feels like, what do you see? What first jumps out to you as the history nerd of the two of us, as the filmmakers and writers grappling with what it means to create and leverage such destruction against our fellow people and the environment? I think where we want to start off is film as a vehicle for metaphor, because as Japan, grappled with the fallout, both metaphorical, moral, literal, etc., of the use of nuclear weaponry, what, as the history nerd of the two of us, do you see within the grappling of that by the filmmaker, by the director, all of that stuff, leveraging a man in a giant lizard suit?
Yeah. I think that so like the thing that we have to be really clear about here is that this movie comes out 9 years post atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, like not even a decade. Everyone involved in the production of this would have had some connection to those attacks in some shape or form. I don't necessarily mean that everyone would have been, directly personally impacted by having like friends or family perish in those attacks. but like just the sheer scope of them and the sheer impact that they had on Imperial Japan. Like these attacks ended World War II definitively. Any resistance that Imperial Japanese forces had up to that point completely the surrender was quick and speedy, while there continued to be some holdouts of resistance on distant islands. It was more a matter of communication versus any actual intent of resisting beyond. Uh, so all that's to say, like these bombings certainly sit large, I think, in popular Japanese culture just because of the impact they had on society as a whole. Functionally, this entire period restructures a lot of Japanese society, and as I called out in the intro, like to this day, the Japanese armed forces are the Japanese self-defense forces, and that is a holdout of some stipulations that were placed on them following World War II. Um, and I think like as if I ignore all the historical context I know about this, if I ignore the fact that I watched I've watched this with the commentary, and it provides even more detail into how these historical events influenced the actual art. If I ignore all that and I try to be a naive viewer, which is to say, I try and not bring in any baggage to this,
Mhm.
it's really hard not to watch this and say, "Oh yeah, this is about like Godzilla is a metaphor for the atomic bomb."
Mhm.
And I think like they play with that, and I say play with, and I feel like that's maybe not the most. It feels like a tactless way of talking about this, but you know they really work to find ways to make that metaphor come to life in vivid ways. So,
Mhm.
for example, like the one survivor from the I think one of the fishing boats that gets attacked, and one guy washes up on shore. He dies not long after, and
Yeah.
it's this kind of like subtle reinforcement of everyone who comes into contact with Godzilla, however incidental, they wind up dead. And it's really hard not to think of that as like oh, this is obviously a reference to um, radiation sickness, radiation poisoning.
Mhm.
Uh, you know, the way that Godzilla's footsteps, the huge imprints leave behind a radioactive trace that the paleontologist is able to detect. And just the sheer amount of like damage wrought on Tokyo and the landscape of Japan in this movie is also, you know, like Godzilla's just smashing through things, and
Yeah.
it's wanton destruction. You could also argue that like some of the design elements of Godzilla, his skin is not really scaly. It's kind of looks like keloid scars, which you get from burn recovery, and like burn
Mhm.
recovery, like you'd have in a following a nuclear attack.
Yeah.
It's there's a lot in here that's just so bluntly on the nose, and yet it works incredibly well because I don't think they're trying to. They're not necessarily trying to create some big statement about it. It's just kind of like a processing of feelings. I think it's just a processing of experience, and I think they do a really great job um, at bringing that metaphor to life.
Mhm.
And it's I don't know. There's a lot in here that we could easily dig into, but I think that's like a great point to kick off at.
Yeah, I mean, that's not even I mean, that is half of the story, but the other half is the how do we solve the problem
Yeah.
of Godzilla
Mhm.
with a scientist who has created a weapon that can
Another doomsday
destroy
weapon.
yeah, another
Yeah.
doomsday weapon, and his anxiety around, "I have created this thing that could literally destroy humanity. Where have we heard that before?"
Yeah.
Um, and the questions around how do how do we like even in Jurassic Park, which we've
Yeah.
talked about, which is another staple dinosaur movie, in such a different but similar ways, where the scientists did it without asking, should we, right?
Yeah.
And so we get not only the grappling with the destruction and how do we deal with the again fallout, but how do we also investigate the creation of such a thing and the morality and politics around this continued stockpiling of just enough weaponry to destroy the world.
Yeah.
Mutually
Yeah.
assured destruction. Hello. Let's
Yeah.
have a conversation. And
Yeah.
yeah, I have similar feelings around things like romance novels and things where I adore a romance novel. And they can be deep and introspective in so many things, but they often have a reputation of being very shallow. Godzilla is the monster movie equivalent of, yes, monster movies can be cheesy and just like there to be scary and whatever, but also they are deep and introspective and it questions so much about the world. Like there's a moment on the bus
Mhm.
where a woman is speaking to a gentleman and she's like, I survived Nagasaki and now this. And like the direct comparison
Yeah.
is just kind of gut punch.
Yeah.
Um, and I appreciate the directness with which they approach the question as well.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so like it's so I'm gonna relate an anecdote. I remember talking with friends about this movie, friends who were probably a little more informed than I was when I was like 17 or 18. And I was like, no, it's not a metaphor for nuclear weapons. And they're like, are you an idiot? Of course it is. And I was like, no, no. And then because I hadn't
Uh,
I hadn't properly watched it. I'd only
yeah.
seen like a bunch of the sequels.
Mhm.
And I think like not long after that I sat down, I watched it. I was like, oh, okay, yeah. No,
Yep.
it's blatant, it's in your face, and it's effective. It's
Mhm.
a you have Godzilla's like a walking atomic bomb in many respects. Like he has his his steam breath, I guess, which
Yeah.
becomes atomic breath in the sequels. He's
Yeah.
got just the size of him is destructive, but like his body language. This is like a creature who is simultaneously in pain and
Yeah.
angry and lashing out.
Mhm.
And the kind of implication is that the H bomb testing near wherever his underground underwater lair or home was has
Mhm.
mutated him and injured him into whatever creature we see now.
Yeah.
Um, because there's also the implication from the villagers on the island that Godzilla is this like ancient, kind of like almost guardian creature who's fickle but not overtly violent.
Yeah.
And when this creature starts showing up, they're like, "It's Godzilla. It's clearly Godzilla." And everyone's just like, okay, I guess this is what we're running with now. This is Godzilla. They find Yamane finds some like scientific basis and paleontological basis for this creature, but
Mhm.
it kind of doesn't matter because it's like this is just this creature wreaking havoc. I don't know. It's really good. It's really effective. Um, I should say the plotting of it is really effective, and especially calling out like Serizawa has created another doomsday weapon.
Mhm.
Serizawa is such a stand-in in many ways for someone like Oppenheimer, who,
Yeah.
Oppenheimer's legacy with the atomic bomb remains a contentious thing to this day. And I don't mean to bring up that name in conjunction with this lightly, but you know, it's fair to say that like the creator of this like weapon that destroys Godzilla also has these moral quandaries about it. Like a large part of his plot is like, we can't use this weapon because no one should have this weapon. If we use this weapon on Godzilla, people will use it in the world. So
Mhm.
he creates the only functional oxygen destroyer and then destroys his notes, even though other
And
people are
himself.
protesting. Pardon?
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
himself.
yeah,
Yeah. So
yeah.
that no
So
one can take the secrets from him.
yeah, so I mean, it's heavy.
Yeah.
as much as this is like a oh man, cool monster effects driven movie,
Mhm.
it's also pretty heavy in
Yeah.
its treatment of these themes and these issues.
I think there's one thing you mentioned, um, and if anyone just heard that sound, it is my cat who is sitting on my chair. I think the one thing that you mentioned is that I find very interesting is that the people of the island that is most impacted, or primarily impacted, I suppose, by Godzilla is
Mhm.
they consider him a god or some kind of deity or, whatever.
Was
And
like a
a
folkloric
folk,
figure.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And even just the idea that as we evolve in our modernity and the things that we create that are meant to destroy, how they impact the stories of old and the gods of old and all of these things. I there's something in that I find very poetic and very broken things can be beautiful, and this is one of those moments where I'm like, that's an example of what I mean when I
Mhm.
say that, because the world continues to change and the world continues to stay the same. But also, as we evolve as a culture and our stories go from word of mouth or music or cave drawings to movies and film, we're still talking about the things in our world that have power over us, that scare us. And Godzilla, the film, is just the modern version of Godzilla, the story that they told once upon a time on that island that they didn't know enough about, that was this powerful, fickle thing that could be a friend or an enemy, depending on the tides of the sea, if you will.
Mhm.
And that continuity, I think, is really cool as well.
Yeah, because the villagers, I think there's a village elder who's like, it's Godzilla. He's the one eating all the fish. Like
Mhm,
our fishermen can't catch anything, and it's because Godzilla must be eating all the fish or driving them away
yeah,
or something.
mhm,
And I mean, obviously, everything becomes a lot more horrific after they get attacked, and there's this huge kind of storm that Godzilla seems to attack during as well.
mhm,
Um, and yeah, I think the kind of marriage of the implied folkloric background of the character, and to be clear, I believe the Godzilla folklore version is like an invention for the movie. Just to
sure,
be clear on that front. But like the way that they marry that kind of idea with the kind of mutated by modern technology,
mhm.
I'm going to quote the Blue Oyster Cult song Godzilla again, like I did in the intro, and say, was it nature points out again and again, or history shows again and again how nature points out the folly of man. Just like really
Mhm,
kind of a pithy line, but it kind of sums up like, yeah, you've done this testing, and it's someone has done this testing, and it has awoken this beast. It has transformed this beast into a monster.
mhm,
Um, it's really there's like a lot of kind of profundity to that. I think there's a lot of
mhm.
it's weighted with
Yeah,
meaning, and it's really interesting and it's really fascinating. The movie does not necessarily dig into it a lot more, but the kind of way that it calls it to mind and
mhm.
creates these implications of meaning are really fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, you could very much take this movie, make it again nowadays, and speak to it too as a critique of how we treat the environment,
Mhm.
you know? And I mean, it's I mean, you don't have to remake it. It does that anyway. But like the idea that what we do not only impacts these gods of old, but also the environment in which we live in a negative way, and we do it so very recklessly. Like I think they in the creation of the oxygen destroyer, the
Yeah.
weapon that will ultimately destroy Godzilla, the example, the test that is done kills a bunch of fish in a fish tank, but he's like, just a little piece of this will destroy all the fish in the sea. And I mean, if that's not a metaphor also for how we treat our oceans nowadays,
Mhm.
I don't know what is, truly.
Yeah, yeah. I also think it's interesting the way that they kind of lean into the horror aspects,
Yeah.
and particularly with everything around Serizawa. Um, like we're kind of introduced to him, and he's this very kind of Byronic hero of sorts.
Mhm.
Like he's engaged to Amiko, who is Dr. Yamane's uh,
Daughter.
daughter,
Mhm.
and she's in love with someone else and is about to break off their engagement because she's in love with the freighter, the is it a freight ship or a freighter,
Mhm.
an officer on a freighter, Ogata, who's much more like blue collar, nice guy, but not really,
Mhm.
grappling with intense moral issues the way Serizawa is.
Mhm.
Serizawa has an eye patch. He's troubled. Like he's a young guy.
Yeah.
He also served in the Imperial Japanese Imperial, was it the Navy? I had this written
That
down somewhere.
seems right.
Yeah,
Ooh.
but like his past is kind of rooted in trauma. Like
Mm.
he's seen war firsthand, and he never wants to see it again. And he's also seen, the kind of destructive power of some of these weapons. And so weirdly, he has created yet another direct destructive weapon. Uh,
Oops.
yeah, and what it does, it disintegrates oxygen atoms and causes organisms to asphyxiate, then dissolve, leaving nothing behind. He shows off how this works
Yeah.
to Amiko in his lab. His lab is something out of a horror movie. It's
Mhm.
toned down certainly.
Yep.
We don't actually see the direct effect of it on the aquarium he tests it on, though. We only see like the roiling water and Amiko's reaction. Like she is
No,
horrified and screams.
we
Do we
see it.
see?
We see it later, yeah. We
We see
don't
it
see it the
later.
first time, but we
Yeah,
see it later when she's telling the secret
yeah,
to her boyfriend.
for sure.
Um,
But
so
like that initial,
yeah,
like
yeah,
it's
yeah.
so
Mhm.
horrific that they don't show it to us. Like it that they're really leaning into that. Like
Mhm.
the yeah, they're really leaning into those tropes.
Totally.
It's very cool. And yeah, Serizawa's in this whole other like movie compared to a lot of the other stuff, which is almost a bit more of like a natural disaster war movie.
Mhm.
And Serizawa's in this like psychological, intense, deeply conflicted moral. I already said moral, but in this deep, you know, battle for his own soul in some ways.
Yeah. It's like they put an Alfred Hitchcock in the middle of Day
Yeah,
After Tomorrow.
yeah, yeah. I don't know. It's really fascinating. Really, I don't know. It's cool. Like it works. A lot of this just kind of
Mhm.
works, and I think some of it. There's kind of a tendency, I think, certainly when I'm watching old movies like this, to be like, okay, well, like you kind of have to take a bit of goofiness with it. But I think tonally, this kind of lands
Mhm.
pretty effectively. Like the rampage through Tokyo is terrifying. They
Mhm.
shoot it really well. It's all set at night, so the kind of only lights are fires in the background or spotlights on Godzilla and explosions
Mhm.
and other things like that. And you kind of forget that, yeah, that's a guy in a suit kind of stomping on cardboard buildings. They do a really good job at it. Even the Now there's the shot where they're looking down on the beach and there are the footprints in it. That
Mhm.
is a little like, okay, well, like that effect is a little creaky, 70 years on. But there's a bit where they're wandering through the village and they come and they're standing in front of like a damaged house and you see all this destruction behind them.
Mhm.
And that's just a matte painting. And it
Nice.
Like it works so well. Like it's such
Yeah.
a good effect.
Mhm.
And when Godzilla first appears, rearing his head over that hilltop,
Oh,
that is just a
good.
hand puppet, but it's really good. Like it adds to the
Oh, that's so incredible.
it's a little uncanny. Like
Yeah.
it's spooky, and they sell the terror of this really
Mhm.
well. And so then when you see Godzilla rising from the waters and stomping around, it hits a lot harder.
Yeah. It's funny you say that. It makes me think of uh, rethink of films like this because, I mean, so much of it, like you said, is just a guy in a big ol' suit stomping on cardboard buildings and, like, little cars and, like, remote control helicopters or whatever.
Yeah,
But there's a another horror film called Stop Motion that we'll talk about at some point, which is absolutely terrifying, but it's a stop motion puppet or stop motion puppets that come to life, and it's truly, horrifying, and thinking about films like this outside of just this is an old movie that they did special effects with
yeah,
before we had quote unquote special effects like technology, and just taking it as it is as a film with really cool tiny special effects takes away some of that impetus to think of it as, "Oh, isn't that cute?"
yeah,
Which I
yeah.
think is important to really, um, appreciate the artistry
Oh
of
yeah,
what they did with what they had, and honestly, even without what they had, just what they did at that time is incredible. It's so cool. I would watch the heck out of a movie that did that again, truly and sincerely.
yeah. The commentary. So there's a great commentary available for this on
Mhm.
the Criterion release of Godzilla. And you can, if you have the Criterion channel, their streaming service, you can just watch the movie with that commentary on. It's really good. I have to look up who did that commentary, but it was a film historian, and he called out the effects director, A.G. Subaraya,
Mhm.
and gave a little background about who this guy was and why he was so passionate about making this. He was someone who watched King Kong in, I think it was 1933, or had heard of King Kong, and was like, "This is the best movie ever. This is what I want to do. I
Heck
want to do cool special effects like this." Um, so he kind of made that his life's goal. It got sidetracked by World War II, and then the second that Toho Studios was hiring to make more kind of effects driven movies like this, he's like, "Yeah, I want to be in. I want to be involved." So a lot of his kind of uh, yeah, he's like actually the guy who launched the special effects division. It looks like,
cool.
and supervised effects for war dramas financed by the Imperial Japanese Navy. Anecdotally, there is a story going around that his effects work was so convincing that like the propaganda films convinced American military forces like, oh wow, their capabilities are a little stronger than we thought.
Mhm.
Whether or not that's true, I could not say.
Yeah.
um yeah, yeah, it's just, this is someone who kind of worked hard at creating all these little scale effects
Mhm.
and this scale recreation of Tokyo,
Yeah.
only to blow it all up.
I
Yeah,
mean,
it's
just
really
Hot
cool.
Fuzz all over again.
Yeah,
It's incredible. I mean, I'm currently rewatching Never After, which is a Dimension 20 series, and I am reminded again and again that Rick Perry is and the art team that supports him are
yeah,
just, oh god, absolutely incredible. And this set director, the tiny Japan is just, oh my
good.
god,
Yeah,
just incredible. It's such an e look, I can wax poetic about how much I love miniatures all day long, but, like, the attention to detail and the dedication to scale and realism is just, mm, mm,
yeah,
just brings me joy.
yeah. They really make it work
Yeah.
to the point that you do forget. that it's a guy in a suit.
Mhm.
It's and I think this is like a really good transition point to talk about what Godzilla becomes as a
Mhm.
franchise, because these kaiju
Yeah.
monster movies are quite popular in Japan, but
Mhm.
also they kind of owe a lot of their history to kind of post-war monster movies from the United States. And a lot of those movies kind of have this formula of like, hey, there's a creature and we just expose it to radiation. Now it's big and it's
Mhm.
terrorizing things. So you had like King Kong is the obvious kind of
Yeah.
original monster movie with the stop motion approach, but then you get a lot of just very random what we would all think of as B movies now. Of
Mhm.
like, I think there's one called Them, which is about giant ants who have been irradiated
Mhm.
attacking a town, and it's kind of like the theme is always like, oh, they've been exposed to radiation, and now we
Mhm.
have to stop these creatures. But because these are all kind of like American movies, there's not a lot of American movies of their time, there's not a lot of introspection about like, and maybe we shouldn't be nuclear testing. Uh,
Mhm.
I'm generalizing here, but what is really interesting about Godzilla becoming a franchise after all of this is that a lot of the explicit anti-nuclear commentary that we get in this kind of starts to vanish as the character becomes much more uh, starts to shift away from this like force of vengeance to become a guardian, and
Mhm.
in some respects, like kind of like gets the superhero treatment.
Yeah.
Godzilla is destructive, but it's like the destructive savior protecting Japan or protecting the world from outside invasion, from and increasingly from alien invasion.
Mhm.
So it goes from being really this moody atmospheric stuff to, hey, we're gonna light everything up. The fight's gonna be in daytime, and you're gonna see all the cool stuff that we're doing, and that's perfectly fine. But I think it's really interesting looking at how the franchise has evolved and changed, and so then and occasionally then you get these kind of sort of remakes or reboots that are going like, no, we're going back to the roots. We got to go back to the original. We got to go
Mhm.
back to this tone. And some of them do a great job of that. Some of them I think miss the mark a little bit. But it is interesting how that happens, and it's particularly interesting how I was talking to you about this before we hit record. But it's the way that the future iterations of Godzilla try to kind of reverse colonize or you know um, almost retcon some of what you think of in the original
Mhm.
source material. So like we now have these I'm thinking explicitly of like the 2014 Godzilla movie directed by Gareth Edwards, which is an entirely like Western production.
Yeah.
But in that, you're like, we're kind of treated to like, oh, Godzilla is this force of wrath and nature, and there are other monsters that are like him that we're kind of like just privy to this conflict between these titanic beings and hoping that we don't get caught in the crossfire.
Yeah.
And there's kind of like an interesting like nature's wrath sort of thing going on there.
Mhm.
But then they also are like, yeah, but also he's got sick atomic beam breath, which is cool. And like, yeah, that is it's cool, but it's interesting how the kind of trappings of the franchise and the character sort of interfere a little bit with maybe what that original vision might have been.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a world in which I overanalyze here to say that story of there are all these massive, terrifying creatures around, and we're just stuck in the middle hoping we
Yeah.
don't get squished. You know what else we're stuck in the middle of? Because we somehow managed to pick movies that are highly politically relevant when we're recording. Multiple nuclear governments, and we're just sitting here doing our cute little movie podcast and hoping we don't get squished in the middle of this conflict, you know? And I think there's as we move ahead in time And as we rewatch things like this and we investigate how series evolves, yes, you kind of scrub some of the original intent, but also you start to see new realities
Yeah.
trickle in.
Yeah.
And as we have, like I said, multiple nuclear powers in the world, and we have, mutually assured destruction, as we have, the years of the Cold War and et cetera. I'll just put the et cetera there. Um, we, the little people, if you will, um, just need to hope that Mothman or that Mothra and Godzilla don't step on us while they're having their little fight, you know?
Yeah.
Um, and so I think there's something to be said of, yes, it's a commodification of a trope that you can just be like, I just want to see big monsters step on buildings and fight. It's cool with lasers.
Yeah.
But also, as the stories that we tell evolve to suit the world that we live in, that foundation that the original built upon has continued to evolve and
Oh
become
yeah.
differently relevant. So I don't know.
Yeah.
I, I there are so many trappings of making films that one wonders how much the folks that leverage, you know, things like Godzilla have to sort of be creative with delivering messages and creating art while still getting the funding that they need to make these multi-million-dollar movies.
For sure. I mean, I think it's also like it would be disingenuous for me to say that like those movies don't mean something
Yeah.
because they certainly do. Like,
Mhm.
especially given the arguments that we're making about this movie, that it's
Yeah.
this. Yeah, it is a monster movie, but it's also a treatise on the horrors of nuclear war, and
Yeah.
certainly all these other movies do. They're also grappling with questions of their own. Whether they're as explicit as this or not is
Yeah.
entirely, up to the viewer. But it's also, I think it's also what we bring into it.
Mhm.
I think in the case of Godzilla, it's pretty explicit that they meant this metaphor from the get go.
Yeah.
But in the case of some of these older movies, I think they're maybe gesturing at some themes, and you can't necessarily make, if you're doing a Godzilla movie in 2014, you've got Bryan Cranston, Aaron Taylor Johnson, Elizabeth Olsen in it, and Godzilla.
Mhm.
Like, you want things for those people to do, but you want cool action
Oh,
and
for sure.
you want it to mean something. And I think
Mhm.
that's a movie that gestures at this kind of like, yeah, at this theme of like the natural world will you will reap what you sow, for better or for worse. The natural world is so much bigger than you and will outlast all of us. Like it'll recover before, yeah,
Oh, yeah.
we could wipe out a lot of stuff on this planet, and life will find a way to
Mhm.
refer back to Jurassic Park, and um, we just might not be here to see it. And I
Yeah.
think like the movie kind of gestures at that
Mhm.
fairly effectively, but it also shows its focus is very much being caught between these forces. So
Yeah.
certainly, yeah, like what you're saying about, you know, being next to the sleeping giant and hoping it doesn't roll over on
Yeah.
you is,
Mhm.
it's certainly a really profound theme and an idea. So yeah, I think all this to say, like, even when Godzilla is fighting Mechagodzilla in the 70s, and it's just cool, there's definitely like
Yeah,
there's something more going on there. It's
absolutely.
not just about uh, cool giant robot fighting cool giant lizard.
Yeah.
It's also a little bit about the military industrial complex and a little bit about, you know, pernicious influence on politics and that taking precedence. Like there's more in there. There's always more in there. And I think
Of course.
uh yeah, thought ended. I that's
I
that's how I
mean,
have to close that
that's a
one.
complete thought. I think that's a
Yeah.
complete thought.
Yeah.
I think we're kind of dancing around the question of genre, just more broadly too, of
Mhm.
if we consider Godzilla and King Kong in these kind of proto uh, monster movies,
Yeah.
you flagged in our notes that it's not really of the monster movie genre. Talk about that, please, because I don't. What? Why? what?
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Well, I mean, it is and it isn't, right? Like, if you think of a Godzilla movie, it's typically like Godzilla and he's fighting other giant monsters. Like, I
Uh-huh.
think if you have fans of Godzilla, I would say younger fans of Godzilla, there are people who for whom probably the 1990, like for me, the 1998 Godzilla movie with Matthew Broderick, that a lot of people would probably discount as being an actual Godzilla movie. That's probably the first exposure a lot of people have to this character and this franchise. And from there, I mean, you have the exposure, you have the 2014 version, which I followed the production of that pretty closely. I was really fascinated by that because I was getting interested in the franchise. And I remember a lot of kind of like fan discussion online about like, oh well, the design isn't that, like, they have to reveal the design before we can determine if this is actually a good Godzilla movie. And then
Mm.
the design came out and they're like, oh well, but how's the roar? Like, is the roar iconic enough? Like, we really need to see the guy, we need to see this thing in motion.
Uh,
And I think that's really interesting because a lot of that is built on decades of fandom around these movies, and particularly, I think it's also worth noting that in the Godzilla filmography, like in the franchise filmography, it's divided into different eras based on the who was the emperor of Japan at that time,
hmm.
and so there are kind of like clear demarcations of where of what kind of each iteration of Godzilla is, which is really interesting. But this is a really long-winded way of saying that this original movie is there are sequels to it, but this original movie is not really, it's not wrapped up in that broader concern of like this is a Godzilla movie. This is it's a monster movie for
Sure.
sure.
Mhm.
It is in that genre of kaiju monster films, and I think the tokusatsu, I believe, I have to look that up. I will look that up after. But there's a specific term for kind of like special effects movie in in Japanese film and TV, and this would fall under that umbrella.
Mhm.
Um, all this is to say that this movie, as much as it is using elements of those genres, this is a natural disaster movie. This is a horror movie about nuclear war more than it is like a straightforward monster movie. I think that there's a lot in here that kind of defies easy categorization because as much as it
Mhm.
is like, yeah, it's a monster movie, it's really like not as concerned with the monster as it is with like the impact it has on the world around it. We do have the big rampage scene, but I think like,
Mhm.
I don't know, this is a tenuous argument for me to make. Maybe I'm on thin ice with this one, but I do think that this is like, there's something about this that it's the first of it's the first one of these, and it gets to be what it wants to be.
Mhm.
Anything that comes after it, it's in the mode of a Godzilla movie, if that makes sense.
So you're kind of considering the Godzilla movie a genre of
Yeah,
movie
I think
rather
that,
than
yes.
as a monster movie. This is because this is still kind of a. I mean, this is a monster movie.
Mhm.
There is a monster. It is a movie, but the the evolution from force of nature and destruction and the being the quote unquote enemy here
Mhm.
to being the protector of the land. That's the actual genre to which you are referring, it sounds like, not like
Yeah,
monsters
yeah,
generally.
yeah. I mean, this is a kaiju film,
Mhm.
and it's a giant movie monster movie,
Yeah.
giant monster. giant monster movie. One of those. So yeah, it's definitely that. But I
Mhm.
think like there are trappings of that genre that I think this kind of grows beyond. Is probably the best way of putting it.
I
I don't know. I'm really
I
going in
would
circles here.
yeah, I mean, I would argue it's not that it grows beyond, it's that the latter ones just trimmed
Mm,
parts, because this was the
yeah,
first.
yeah.
So
Good point. Good point.
this this was the perfect rose in Plato's philosophy of monster movie of um Godzilla movies,
Yeah.
and then someone saw it on a cave wall and went, that's not that's not a thorn. We're just gonna get rid of that. I don't like that. Um, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. It's
it's nice to
also
use my philosophy degree.
yeah. It's also interesting that like there's a heavily 2 years later they also have a
Mhm.
heavily re-edited version of this
Hmm.
for American audiences called Godzilla King of the Monsters.
Oh yeah.
Uh, it includes this entire uh, there's an entirely new character who's kind of like inserted into some of these scenes. American reporter Steve Martin.
Oh no.
Um, yeah, it's very different movie. I started watching it and I was like, I don't care for this. So I stopped. I should probably finish it at some point, but
Uh,
it's a much more kind of typical uh like they kind of ground the kind of like love story in this a lot earlier
hmm.
versus here is kind of like a lot of setup and then we are introduced to kind of like the scientist characters and Amiko and Ogata and yeah, yeah, it's a little
Choices were made.
choices were
Choices were
made
made.
for this
Yeah.
other version. Yeah, I don't know. I think yeah, good
Speaking,
movie, good
yeah,
movie.
it is a good movie, and
Yeah.
it's again, I always come back to this. I think the power of stories, regardless of genre, regardless of intent, is so fundamental to everything that makes us human, and the the things that we choose to highlight, the things that we choose to not include, as pointed out in sort of the latter Godzilla movies, um, and how we deal with things that are bigger than ourselves through storytelling is just so cool.
Yeah,
Brings me it's
yeah,
just so cool. Um, both literally, with a giant monster and etc. So, I mean, I think that I'm not sure what else you wanna dig into here, because like, we look at this franchise as it has evolved to become more of an action movie, but also maybe to grapple with some things that the first one wasn't grappling with because the world evolves, technology evolves, and as a monster film, how it has been made smaller, perhaps, to address different things. What specifically, when you look at Godzilla, the first one,
mm,
and the broader genre, what does it lack for you compared to the original?
mm. I think that the broader genre, and I think maybe I'm referring explicitly to a lot of the more recent like Western Godzilla movies, because we had what Godzilla versus Kong, Godzilla X Kong. There's an entire TV series spin-off as well.
Mhm.
I think that like they do a good job at. I'm not trying to say any of these are poorly made. I think a lot of them understand like, hey, we're here to entertain and to have fun and to show you
Mhm.
cool monster designs fighting each other. But I think like what a lot of the later stuff loses for me, and part of why I still really enjoy that 2014 Godzilla movie, is there's a big emphasis in this movie and on that one, and the kind of like teasing out showing the monster. There's a bit more mystery about it, I think. And I think they kind of, I think I appreciate leaning into those more more of the horror tropes around this character and this being,
Mhm.
and using that for impact. And I think of like, boy, like you look at some of the plots for some of those 60s and 70s Godzilla movies, they're real goofy.
Yeah.
Um, it's like if I'm just doing a quick peruse here, yeah, you have Godzilla Raids Again as a direct sequel to this. Different director, um, and it is Godzilla fighting another giant monster.
Mhm.
And then they follow this up with Godzilla, King Kong versus Godzilla, and then Mothra. And it's by the time you get to like Mothra, um, there's a lot more like kind of mysticism being incorporated versus like these are
Mhm.
just giant monsters created by science gone wrong or ancient things that we've awoken. Um, I don't know. It's interesting. They start becoming a little bit more of like a the franchise starts to appear a bit more, and yeah, I think you start to lose sight of the impact that that first movie had. Like I'm looking at like so by like 1965, they've had Godzilla fight uh, Ghidorah, the three-headed monster, which is like
Mhm.
iconic, movie Godzilla movie villain.
Yeah.
But then they follow this up with Invasion of Astro Monster. This is the sixth film in the Godzilla franchise, directed by Ishiro Honda, who did the original Godzilla here. Um, and this is where it starts to get into like, oh, and there are aliens on Planet X who are trying to infiltrate Earth and stuff like that.
Yeah.
This is a huge oversimplification of the plot of this movie, but it gets weirder and it gets weirder and it gets weirder, and it's kind of that like there's a bit of the like you can kind of see a bit of the later MCU stuff in this, where it's like
Mhm.
you kind of have to start watching all of them to kind of get a sense of, oh, okay, we're paying off these things. They're aliens
Right.
now.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay.
Uh-huh.
Uh, and you get to the point they have like Son of Godzilla, which is kind of a comedy movie. I don't know. There's like a little weird
Uh,
little Godzilla kid.
yeah. Adorable, but
It's
also, huh?
depends on your definition. Um, yeah, I'm just going through like a cycle of all of this. It's really fascinating how much the franchise has going on.
Yeah. I mean, if it's again further proof that nothing changes. Something was a hit,
Yeah,
let's make 50 of them
yeah,
until we've wrung that particular stretch dry, you know? Um I I have the IMDb page open in front of me because names are a thing that I'm trash at. And this came out the same year as Seven Samurai.
yeah. Do you
God,
want to know a fun fact?
always.
Always. That was what a weird way for me to bring this up. Um, so the director Ishiro Honda
Uh-huh.
was a good friend of Akira Kurosawa
Mhm.
prior on I think a bunch of their kind of like the war movies that Kurosawa was making just as part of his job making propaganda films.
Mhm.
Ishiro Honda was the second. He was the assistant director on Senshiro Sugata, which are these martial arts movies Kurosawa made. Um,
Cool.
Honda then spends the next 20 years working on kaiju movies almost exclusively, and then retires. And Kurosawa's like, "Hey, man, so I got these later career movies of mine. You should come
Uh-huh.
out of retirement and work with me again." So he is the second unit director and assistant director on everything Kurosawa does from the mid 70s onwards.
Cool.
Yeah,
That's fun. That is a
and
fun fact.
of course Takeshi Shimura was in Seven Samurai, and it's like, all right,
Mhm.
I'm going to go do a Godzilla now.
Yeah. Listen, we appreciate an actor that can be flexible and diverse in their
Yes,
representations.
yes,
Um, so I think that probably gets us to a point where ultimately I mean, I liked it. It was a good movie. It's a fun
Yeah.
movie. The effects are incredible. The metaphors continue to be poignant and relevant to this day. Um, for those of you at home, we are recording in March in 2026. So, the world continues, the cycle continues. And so, if you enjoy Godzilla, if you take our recommendation and go watch it or have already watched it, what else should you watch, Ben?
Um, excuse me. I've talked about this movie so much in this
Mm.
discussion already, but it's going to be a 2024, the 2014 Godzilla, directed by Gareth Edwards, who listeners may remember as the director of Rogue One. He did Godzilla based
Mm.
on the strength of a movie he did called Monsters, which is a kind of gritty, grounded kaiju movie, and kind of got him the job for Godzilla. Based on Godzilla, that gritty, grounded war movie approach that he took got him the job for Rogue One. So it's
Nice.
yeah, I think that is a really cool movie that manages to capture some of the energy of this film. It's a little more franchise oriented, and indeed, 12 years later, like I've said, I fell asleep watching the Godzilla X Kong. I can't remember the subtitle of that movie, but their
Uh-huh.
team up movie. I fell asleep watching that a couple nights ago. And then they also have the Monarch Legacy of Monsters series. And my goodness, the way that they're making this plot and these stories so convoluted is fascinating to me.
Uh-huh.
Seems very appropriate given the digression I just had about all the Godzilla sequels. So, but yeah, I'd recommend that. I think it's a really cool, atmospheric, and moody movie. Also, Wayne from Letterkenny is in it. And
Nice.
this one time in downtown Ottawa one summer, I gave him directions on where he could possibly go buy a pack of smokes.
That's
That's
your
my
that's
that's my
your six
celebrity
degrees of
interaction.
Kevin Bacon
Yeah,
story of
yeah.
Letterkenny.
I
I love
I
it.
gave Jared Kiso directions this one time, and he was in
Incredible.
Godzilla, bringing it all back home, bringing it full circle.
Nice. Incredible.
How about
Uh,
how about you? What would you recommend?
um, so a couple of years ago, I think something like that, a friend of ours recommended we had a movie night and we watched a film called PG Psycho Gorman, which is just just a weird it gave me like Power Rangers vibes. It's from like 2020 or something, relatively modern,
Yeah.
but it has something about it that reminds me of Godzilla, the original, and I can't entirely put my finger on it,
Okay.
but I recommend that one. And also you mentioned Oppenheimer. So
Yeah.
I'll be like, well, I mean, you could, I guess, watch Oppenheimer because it has a very similar. I think they have like a little thing at the end where Oppenheimer is approached by Albert Einstein, who's like shaking his finger at him metaphorically, of like, look what you did. This is us. We have to live with this forever now. This was our fault. And that moral examination of you create this world-ending thing. That's on you, man.
Mm.
Speaking of creating world-ending things, we didn't do that, but you can find us on a Patreon that we created called Coffee and Kurosawa. I love my pivots. I don't know why you're laughing.
Good pivot.
You can
Good pivot.
you, you can also find us on Blue Sky and Instagram as Coffee Kurosawa Pod. You can find me on Blue Sky, Instagram, and Letterboxd as Farrah Sarpkaya, and at sarpkaya.ca, where I lend my voice as a voice actor. Where can the good people find you?
The wonderful good people who listen to the show can find me on Blue Sky as at the Benjamin and on Letterboxd as at Benjamin.
So now,
And
how do we
yeah,
fade out? How do we
how do we
fade to
fade
black
out?
as
Hang
we
on,
go
hang
back
on.
into the ocean?
I got this.
Oh no.
I got this.
Oh no.
Oh no. They say he's got to go. Go, go, Godzilla. Yeah.
Oh,
Shout out to Blue Oyster Cult.